You people always try to sneak in. Not today. The sentence cracked through the polished glass lobby of the TechSphere conference like a verdict already decided, loud enough that conversations paused and heads turned. Naomi Carter didn't flinch. She stood at the check-in gate, hands relaxed at her sides, dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer, dark jeans, and clean white sneakers. Nothing that screamed billionaire, nothing that matched the glossy banners towering above her announcing keynote speakers and eight-figure sponsors. Around her, badges flashed, lanyards gleamed, and every person who walked past seemed to fit an unspoken mold. She didn't. The staffer, a young white man with a tight smile and a scanner still raised in his hand, looked her up and down again like he was searching for something to confirm what he had already decided. "You're not on the list," he said, sharper this time, as if repetition made it truth. Naomi's eyes moved once, calmly, to the tablet in his hand, then back to his face. "Check again," she said, her voice even, almost quiet, but steady enough to cut through the tension beginning to build in the air. He didn't check. Instead, he laughed under his breath, glancing at a coworker who leaned in just enough to see, just enough to agree without speaking. "Ma'am, this is a private event. You can't just walk in." A few feet away, a woman in a navy dress slowed her steps, her badge swinging slightly as she watched. Behind her, a developer in a hoodie pulled out his phone, not fully recording yet, but ready. The air shifted. Naomi remained still, as if rooted to the polished concrete floor, her posture relaxed but unyielding. She had seen this before. At 26, standing in a venture capital office in Palo Alto, when a partner asked if she was with the catering team. At 31, when a panel host assumed she was there to take notes, not lead the discussion. The setting changed. The script didn't. "I said you need to step aside," the staffer added, louder now, emboldened by the small audience forming around them. A second staff member approached, badge clipped higher, tone colder. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though his eyes were already fixed on Naomi like she was the answer. "She's trying to get in without clearance," the first one replied quickly. The word trying hung in the air like an accusation. Naomi exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting past them for just a second, over the massive LED screen cycling sponsor logos, over the stage lights being tested inside the main hall, over the event that hummed with energy just beyond the barrier they were so eager to keep her from crossing. Then she looked back, calm, measured, unmoved. "You're making a mistake," she said, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a simple fact. The second staffer folded his arms. "No, we're following protocol." And that word, protocol, landed exactly where it always did, dressed up as policy, hiding something older underneath. Somewhere behind them, a phone lifted higher. A quiet voice whispered, "This doesn't feel right." But Naomi didn't turn toward it. She didn't need to. Her focus stayed forward, her expression unreadable, her silence heavier than anything they had said. And in that silence, something began to shift, not loudly, not all at once, but enough that the room, for the first time, started paying attention. The second staffer did not wait for a response. He stepped slightly closer, not enough to touch her, but enough to signal control, the kind that came from habit more than authority. "We are not doing this back and forth," he said, his voice lower now, firmer, as if quietness made it more official. "If your name is not in the system, you do not get in." Naomi's gaze dropped for a fraction of a second to the scanner still idle in his hand, then to the blank space on the tablet where her identity had not even been searched. Not missed, not overlooked, ignored. Around them, the crowd had grown thicker, not large enough to cause a scene, but enough to create a circle of attention that neither staff member could pretend was not there. A man in a gray hoodie shifted his weight and whispered to the woman beside him. Did they even scan her? The woman did not answer, but her eyes stayed fixed on Naomi, brows slightly drawn, as if she was trying to solve something that did not add up. Naomi lifted her chin just slightly, her expression unchanged. "You never checked," she said, calm, precise, each word placed exactly where it needed to land. The first staffer scoffed, shaking his head. "I do not need to check what is obvious." That word again. Obvious. It lingered longer than it should have. Behind the check-in counter, a third staff member glanced up from her screen, her fingers pausing mid-keystroke. She had heard that tone before. She had used it before. And now, hearing it from the other side, it sounded different. Sharper. Harder to justify. Maybe just run it once, she said quietly, not stepping forward, not challenging directly, but enough that the suggestion entered the space. The second staffer did not turn. We are fine, he replied, dismissing her without looking, his focus still locked on Naomi. Ma'am, step aside so we can assist actual attendees. The sentence was smooth, practiced, and just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. A few heads turned again. The woman in navy shifted her stance, no longer pretending she was just passing through. Naomi let the silence stretch for a moment, long enough that it began to press against the edges of the situation. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she reached slowly into the inside pocket of her blazer and pulled out her phone. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, as if time itself had slowed around her. The second staffer watched closely. If you are calling someone to get you in, it is not going to change anything, he said, almost amused now. Naomi did not respond to him. She looked down at the screen, tapped once, then lifted it to her ear. It is starting, she said, her tone unchanged, steady, controlled. On the other end, a voice answered immediately, sharp and prepared. Understood. Do you want us to proceed? Naomi's eyes lifted, not to the staff, not to the crowd, but beyond them, toward the conference floor that pulsed with energy just out of reach. For a brief second, something shifted behind her calm expression. Not anger, not frustration, something colder, something certain. Not yet, she said softly. Then she lowered the phone, letting it rest at her side. The staffer smirked slightly, exchanging a glance with his colleague. Like I said, he muttered, it is not going to matter. Naomi looked at him then, directly, fully, and for the first time there was a weight in her gaze that had not been there before. Not louder, not sharper, just heavier. It already does, she replied. And somewhere in the background, unnoticed by most but not by all, one of the large sponsor screens flickered for half a second before returning to normal, like the system itself had just been touched. The flicker was brief, almost invisible, but it was enough. The third staff member behind the counter blinked and looked up at the overhead screens, her fingers hovering again above the keyboard. Something in the system had shifted, not crashed, not failed, just responded. Naomi did not move. She stood exactly where she had been told not to stand, calm as ever, as if the tension around her belonged to someone else. The second staffer let out a small breath through his nose, impatient now, the kind of impatience that comes when control feels slightly out of reach. We are done here, he said, his tone tightening. You need to leave the check-in area, right now. Naomi did not answer immediately. She let the silence return, thicker this time, heavier, pressing into the small circle of onlookers who were no longer pretending to be distracted. The man in the gray hoodie had his phone fully raised now, recording without hiding it. The woman in navy crossed her arms, her posture no longer neutral. And behind the counter, the third staff member finally spoke again, this time a little louder. The sponsor dashboard just refreshed, she said, eyes still on her screen. The second staffer turned halfway, irritation flashing. And she hesitated for half a second, then continued. There is a priority flag. I have not seen that before. He exhaled sharply. It is probably a system glitch. Stay focused. But she did not look convinced. Naomi watched the exchange without interruption, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged. Inside, the conference hummed louder now, the low bass of a keynote soundcheck rolling faintly through the walls, the promise of innovation and access just feet away from where she stood being denied both. She had built rooms like that, funded them, shaped them, and still, here it was again. Not the first time. Never the first time. Years earlier, she had stood outside a different door in San Francisco, holding a pitch deck worth more than the firm she was trying to enter, only to be asked if she was delivering documents for someone else. She remembered the pause then too. The look, the assumption. It did not come from policy. It came from pattern. Back in the present, the first staffer shifted his stance, stepping slightly to the side, as if to physically block the path more clearly. Last chance, he said, louder now, aware of the eyes on him, performing authority as much as enforcing it. Either you step away, or we call security to handle it. The word security landed differently this time, not as a threat, but as a signal that things had already gone too far. A soft murmur rippled through the small crowd. Someone whispered, "This is unnecessary." Naomi's eyes moved briefly across the faces around her, not searching for support, just registering it. Then she looked back at the staffer in front of her. Calm, unshaken. "Go ahead," she said quietly. No defiance, no fear, just permission. The staffer frowned, thrown off by the lack of resistance. He glanced at his colleague, then back at her, as if trying to find the angle that would restore control. Behind them, the third staff member's screen updated again, this time with a subtle alert tone that did not belong to normal operations. She leaned closer, her voice dropping but urgent. "It is happening again. Access levels are changing." The second staffer turned fully now, annoyance giving way to something else. Uncertainty. Naomi did not look at the screen. She did not need to. She already knew what they were just beginning to notice. The system was not glitching. It was responding. And whatever they thought they were controlling at that check-in gate was no longer theirs to manage. The word uncertainty did not sit well on the second staffer's face. It flickered there for only a moment before he forced it back into something sharper. Something louder. "Step away from the gate," he repeated, this time raising his voice just enough to reclaim attention, just enough to remind the growing crowd who was supposed to be in control. But the room was no longer listening the same way. The shift had already begun. Behind him, the third staff member leaned closer to her screen, her brows tightening as lines of data refreshed faster than she could follow. "This is not a glitch," she said, more firmly now, no longer whispering. "Permissions are being overridden from a higher level." The second staffer turned, irritation cracking at the edges. "There is no higher level than admin access here," he snapped, but even as he said it, his eyes flicked to the screen, searching, checking, doubting. Naomi stood still, her phone resting loosely in her hand, her posture unchanged. She did not rush. She did not react. She simply waited. The kind of waiting that does not come from uncertainty, but from knowing exactly what comes next. A faint chime echoed from the overhead system, subtle but distinct, like a notification meant for someone who understood its meaning. The large LED screen near the entrance shifted again, this time not flickering, but updating. Sponsor logos rearranged themselves in a new order, one name rising to the top where it had not been before. A few people in the crowd noticed. A few more followed their gaze. "Wait," the man in the gray hoodie muttered, lowering his phone slightly as he squinted at the screen. "That name. I have seen it." The woman in navy stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she read. Behind the counter, the third staff member's voice sharpened with realization. "The priority flag is tied to the top sponsor account," she said, turning slowly toward her colleagues. "Full system control access." The second staffer froze for half a second, just enough to betray the crack in his certainty. Then he shook his head, trying to push past it. "That does not change anything here," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier edge. "She still does not have clearance." Naomi's eyes lifted slightly, following the direction of the crowd's attention toward the screen, then back to him. "Clearance," she repeated softly, as if testing the word, weighing it. The silence that followed was different now. Not empty. Charged. The kind of silence that builds right before something irreversible happens. Another alert sounded, this one louder, impossible to ignore. The scanner in the first staffer's hand lit up on its own, the idle screen replaced by a new interface he had never seen before. His grip tightened instinctively. "What is this?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The third staff member did not answer right away. She was staring at her monitor, her expression no longer uncertain, but stunned. "It is a remote override," she said finally, her voice quieter again, but this time because she understood the weight of it. Someone just took control of the entire event system. The words landed heavily, spreading through the small crowd like a ripple. Phones lifted higher. Whispers turned into open questions. And at the center of it all, Naomi Carter remained exactly where she had been told not to stand, her calm now no longer mistaken for passivity, but something far more deliberate. The second staffer looked at her again, really looked this time, as if trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the system unraveling behind him. "Who are you?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Naomi held his gaze, steady, unhurried, her voice low but unmistakably clear. "You already decided that," she said. Then, After a brief pause that felt longer than it was, she added, "Now you get to see what that decision costs." The words lingered in the air, heavier than the system alerts, heavier than the shifting screens, heavier than the quiet tension pressing in from every direction. The second staffer did not respond right away. For the first time since this started, he did not have a script ready. His eyes moved, not just at Naomi, but past her, around her, toward the screens, the devices, the small details that no longer lined up with the version of control he thought he had. Behind him, the third staff member's monitor updated again, this time with a full interface takeover, layers of access panels opening one after another like doors being unlocked in rapid succession. She inhaled sharply. "It is escalating," she said, her voice tight, not with panic, but with realization. "This is executive-level override. I have never seen this outside corporate." The word corporate landed differently. It carried weight. It carried distance. It carried authority far beyond a check-in desk. The first staffer looked down at the scanner still glowing in his hand, its interface no longer recognizable. "Why is it asking for approval?" he muttered, his voice losing its earlier confidence. The screen displayed a single prompt, clean and simple, waiting. Authorization pending. The crowd had stopped whispering. Now they were watching. Fully. Phones raised, eyes locked, the moment no longer something to pass by, but something to witness. The man in the gray hoodie took a step closer, his voice low but clear. "This is not normal." The woman in navy nodded once, her arms still crossed, but her stance now firm, grounded in something more than curiosity. Naomi stood at the center of it all, unchanged, her presence no longer questioned in the same way. Not because they understood her yet, but because the system did. And that was enough to shift everything. She lifted her phone again, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise. "Status," she said calmly. The voice on the other end responded immediately. "Full access secured. Sponsor authority confirmed. All event systems are now under your control." Naomi's eyes did not move from the staff in front of her. "Hold," she replied. "Not yet." The second staffer swallowed, the motion subtle but visible. "Look," he said, trying to recover, trying to rebuild something that was already slipping. "If there is some kind of technical issue, we can get someone from IT to take a look, but right now you still need to step away." The sentence sounded weaker this time, stretched thin over a reality that was no longer supporting it. Naomi tilted her head slightly, studying him, not with anger, not with frustration, but with a kind of clarity that made everything else in the room feel louder by comparison. "You are still saying the same thing," she said quietly. "Even now." Behind him, the third staff member turned her screen slightly, just enough that he could see it clearly. Lines of authority, names, permissions, all pointing upward to a single account that now sat at the top of the entire structure. Highlighted. Active. Unquestioned. His eyes followed it, slowly, until they landed on the name attached to it. And for a brief second, everything in his posture changed. Not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but enough. Enough that the certainty left his shoulders. Enough that the confidence drained from his voice. Enough that the question he had asked earlier returned, this time not careless, not dismissive, but real. He looked back at her, his voice lower now, almost careful. "Who are you?" The room held its breath without realizing it. Naomi Carter did not step forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply met his gaze, steady and unshaken, and let the answer settle before she spoke. "I am the one you decided did not belong," she said. Then she paused, just long enough for the weight of that truth to land, before adding, "And I am the one who decides what happens here next." And somewhere deep within the system, another command lined up, waiting only for her word. The command waited. It did not rush. It did not force itself forward. It simply sat there in the system, silent and absolute, like gravity before the fall. Naomi Carter did not move. She did not need to. The room had already shifted around her. The second staffer's posture tightened, his shoulders no longer squared with confidence, but held in place by something else entirely. Awareness. Behind him, the third staff member stared at the screen, her eyes scanning the authorization layers now fully exposed, each one confirming the same thing again and again from different angles. There was no mistake, no glitch, no workaround. This was real. "Her name is on everything," she said quietly, not to challenge, not to argue, but because the truth had nowhere else to go. The first staffer took a step back without realizing it, the scanner still in his hand now lowered, no longer a tool of control, but something closer to a question he did not know how to answer. "That is not possible," he muttered, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Naomi's gaze remained steady, not following their movements, not reacting to their doubt. She had seen this moment before too. Not here, not this room, but this shift, that exact second when certainty collapses and reality replaces it. At 29, standing in a boardroom in New York, when a senior executive asked who had approved her proposal, assuming someone else must have signed off on it. At 34, when a partner congratulated her assistant for a deal she had personally negotiated. The silence that followed those moments had always felt the same. Not loud, not chaotic, just heavy, inevitable. Back in the present, the second staffer cleared his throat, forcing his voice back into shape. "If this is some kind of misunderstanding, we can resolve it internally," he said, choosing his words more carefully now, each one measured, each one trying to rebuild ground that had already given way. "There is no need to escalate this further." Naomi tilted her head slightly, considering him, not with sympathy, not with judgment, but with a clarity that made his words feel smaller in comparison. "You already escalated it," she said calmly. "The moment you decided I did not belong." The sentence landed without volume, but it carried further than anything else that had been said. The crowd did not move. They were not whispering anymore. They were listening, fully. The man in the gray hoodie lowered his phone just a little, not because the moment was less important, but because it had become something else, something more than content. The woman in navy exhaled slowly, her expression no longer questioning, but resolved. Behind the counter, the third staff member straightened, her voice firmer now, anchored in what she could see clearly. "All access points are tied to her authorization," she said. "Main stage, speaker control, sponsor network, even security routing. It all runs through her." The word security returned, but this time it meant something entirely different. The second staffer's eyes flicked toward Naomi again, and for the first time, there was no resistance in the look, only recognition arriving too late. Naomi lifted her phone once more, her movements as precise as before. "Proceed," she said softly. There was no hesitation on the other end. "Confirmed. Initiating full event override." The effect was immediate, but not chaotic. The overhead lights dimmed slightly, not shutting down, but shifting. The large screens at the entrance cleared, the rotating sponsor visuals dissolving into a single static display. Attendees inside the conference hall began to notice. Conversations paused. Heads turned. The system was not breaking. It was being taken back. Naomi lowered her phone slowly, her eyes still on the staff in front of her. "This is what control looks like," she said, her voice even, grounded, undeniable. Not volume, not assumptions, just truth with authority. And as the weight of that authority settled into every corner of the space, one thing became clear to everyone watching. This was no longer about access. It never was. It was about who had the right to decide it in the first place. The shift did not stop at the entrance. It moved inward, spreading through the conference like a quiet wave that no one could outrun. Inside the main hall, conversation slowed, then stalled, as the massive screens that once displayed polished branding now held a single line of text waiting for its next command. Speakers paused mid-sentence. Staff members checked their devices, tapping faster, confusion building with every second that passed without explanation. Back at the check-in gate, the second staffer took another step back, this time fully aware of it, his hands no longer positioned as a barrier, but hanging uncertain at his sides. "What did you just do?" he asked, his voice no longer controlled, no longer certain, but searching. Naomi did not answer immediately. She watched the ripple effect move beyond them, through glass and steel and carefully designed spaces that now responded to her presence whether anyone here understood it or not. The third staff member swallowed, her eyes still locked on the screen. "The keynote system is paused," she said. "All stage access is locked pending authorization." The words carried outward, picked up by those close enough to hear, repeated in fragments by those further away. Locked, paused, authorization. The language of control had changed, and everyone felt it. The man in the gray hoodie lowered his phone completely now, not because the moment had ended, but because it had become something else entirely. Something real. The woman in navy stepped forward, closer than before, her voice low but firm. They stopped the entire event, she said, not asking, not guessing, but stating what everyone was beginning to realize. Naomi finally looked back at the staffer in front of her, her expression calm, almost patient, as if this outcome had always been part of the equation. I corrected it, she said simply. The second staffer blinked, the words not landing the way he expected. Corrected what? He asked, though something in him already knew the answer would not be what he wanted to hear. Naomi's gaze did not shift. A system that failed its own standard, she replied. You enforced rules without understanding who they were built for. Behind him, the third staff member turned her screen again, this time fully, no hesitation left. The name at the top remained unchanged. Active, dominant, unchallengeable. She has full sponsor authority, she said, her voice steady now, grounded in certainty. Primary investor level. Everything routes through her. The words spread faster than anything else had so far. Primary investor. Everything. A quiet wave of realization moved through the small crowd, turning confusion into clarity, curiosity into understanding. The second staffer looked at Naomi again, but this time there was no attempt to measure her, no attempt to define her based on what he saw. That part was gone, replaced by something heavier. Consequence. Naomi lifted her phone once more, her thumb resting lightly against the screen, not pressing, not yet. Current status, she said. The response came instantly. Event operations suspended. Awaiting final directive. Naomi nodded once, almost to herself, then looked back at the entrance behind the staff, at the space she had been denied just minutes earlier. The distance between where she stood and where she was supposed to be had not changed physically, but everything else had. You asked me to step aside, she said, her voice even, measured, carrying clearly in the now silent space. So I did. She paused, just long enough for the words to settle, for the meaning to unfold in real time across the faces watching her. Then she added, softer but sharper, and when I did, everything stopped. The weight of that truth settled into the room, undeniable, irreversible. And in that moment, no one was looking at her the same way they had before. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt earned. It stretched across the glass entrance, across the halted conference floor beyond it, across every person who had witnessed the shift from assumption to authority in real time. Naomi Carter stood exactly where she had been, but the space around her had changed completely. No one was asking her to move now. No one was telling her where she did or did not belong. The second staffer opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again, the instinct to speak still there, but no longer supported by certainty. Behind him, the third staff member slowly leaned back from her screen, her hands resting on the edge of the desk, as if grounding herself in what she had just seen. All systems are still paused, she said quietly, almost to confirm that none of this had reversed itself. Nothing is running without her authorization. The word her carried through the space with a clarity that needed no explanation. Naomi did not respond to it. Her gaze had shifted slightly, not to the screens, not to the staff, but somewhere inward, somewhere deeper than the moment unfolding around her. For a brief second, the noise of the conference, the lights, the attention, all of it faded behind something older. She was 17 again, standing outside a school auditorium after being told she could not present because the panel was already full, only to watch someone else take her place minutes later. She was 22, sitting in the back of a startup competition, hearing her idea echoed by someone else who received applause for it. The same pattern, different rooms, different faces, always the same. Quiet dismissal, dressed up as process, as policy, as something that sounded reasonable until you stood on the other side of it. Back in the present, Naomi exhaled slowly, the memory passing not as pain, but as confirmation. This was never new. This was just the first time it ended here. The man in the gray hoodie spoke again, softer now, not to her, but to the space around them. They did not even check her, he said, the statement landing heavier now that everyone understood what that meant. The woman in navy nodded once, her voice steady. They already decided before she spoke. No one argued. There was nothing left to argue. The second staffer finally looked down, his gaze breaking for the first time since this began, as if the ground itself had shifted beneath him and he could no longer pretend it had not. Naomi brought her phone up again, her movements just as precise as before, but this time there was a subtle difference. Not hesitation. Intention. Status, she said. The response came immediately, calm and prepared. Full suspension remains active. All attendees and speakers are awaiting instruction. We are ready when you are. Naomi closed her eyes for a brief moment, not to escape the situation, but to center it, to decide what came next not from reaction, but from control. When she opened them again, the room felt smaller, quieter, focused entirely on her without a single word being spoken. She looked at the staff in front of her, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something far more grounded. Finality. This was not about access, she said, her voice even, carrying without force. It was about how easily you removed it. The sentence settled into the space, undeniable. Then she lowered her phone slightly, her thumb hovering just above the screen, where one final command waited, simple and absolute, the kind of decision that did not need to be rushed because it had already been earned. And in that suspended moment, every person watching understood something without being told. Whatever she chose next would not just affect this event. It would define what this place stood for after today. The command was still there, waiting, silent and absolute, but the room had already begun to understand what it meant. Naomi Carter did not rush. She let the weight of the moment settle fully, let every person present feel the pause, the consequence, the shift that had already happened long before her thumb would move. The second staffer finally spoke again, but the confidence that once filled his voice was gone, replaced by something more fragile, more human. We can fix this, he said, not as a command, not even as an argument, but as a request trying to find its footing. Whatever went wrong here, we can correct it without shutting everything down. Naomi looked at him, her expression steady, her gaze clear, as if she was looking through the words rather than at them. You already had that chance, she said calmly. The sentence did not rise, did not press, but it carried more weight than anything louder could have. Behind him, the third staff member nodded almost instinctively, her eyes still on the system that now answered to a single authority. There were multiple prompts to verify, she added quietly. The system did not fail. We did. The admission hung in the air, undeniable, unfiltered. A few people in the crowd shifted, not away, but closer, drawn into the gravity of what was unfolding. The man in the gray hoodie spoke again, louder this time, not recording, not performing, just stating what everyone was now thinking. She asked you to check. The woman in navy followed, her voice sharp with clarity. More than once. No one interrupted. No one corrected them. Because there was nothing left to correct. Naomi lowered her gaze briefly to her phone, the screen reflecting softly in her eyes, the final command still waiting. Cancel event. It was simple, clean, irreversible. She had executed decisions like this before. Deals worth hundreds of millions. Partnerships built over years. But this was different. This was not about numbers. This was about something older than business, something deeper than access. Respect. Or the lack of it. She remembered another room, years ago, where she had chosen silence instead of consequence, hoping the system would correct itself over time. It had not. It had repeated, again and again, until now. Back in the present, Naomi lifted her head, her gaze sweeping once across the entrance, the halted conference beyond it, the people watching, the staff standing in front of her, no longer barriers, just witnesses. You think this is about punishment, she said, her voice even, grounded. It is not. The second staffer did not respond. He could not. She continued, her tone unchanged, but the meaning sharper now. It is about standards. The ones you claim to uphold. The ones you chose to ignore. The words settled into the space, not as an accusation, but as a mirror. Behind the counter, the system chimed again, a soft reminder that time was still moving, even if everything else had stopped. Naomi's thumb hovered once more above the screen. The entire event waited on that single motion. The crowd did not move. The staff did not speak. Even the background noise of the conference felt distant now, like something already fading. Naomi took one slow breath, not out of hesitation, but out of certainty. Then she spoke, her voice low, clear, final. End it. Her thumb pressed down. And in that exact moment, Every screen across the conference went dark before reappearing with a single message, simple and undeniable. Event canceled by executive authority. The silence that followed was complete. Not shocked, not chaotic, just still. Because everyone understood. This was not a reaction. This was a decision. And it had just been made. The message did not blink. It did not scroll. It simply stayed there, stretched across every screen in the building, clear and final. Event canceled by executive authority. Inside the main hall, speakers stood frozen mid-step, microphones still in hand, their voices cut off not by interruption, but by absence. The system had not crashed. It had obeyed. Conversations dissolved into silence, then into low murmurs that carried confusion, disbelief, and something deeper. Recognition. Back at the entrance, no one moved at first. The second staffer stared at the nearest screen as if waiting for it to change back, for the message to disappear, for reality to correct itself. It did not. The first staffer slowly lowered the scanner completely, his grip loosening until it rested uselessly at his side. Behind them, the third staff member exhaled, long and steady, her eyes no longer searching for errors but absorbing what had already been confirmed. "It is done," she said quietly. Naomi Carter did not look at the screens. She did not need confirmation. She had given the command. She already knew the outcome. Instead, she looked at the space in front of her, the same entrance that had been denied to her minutes ago, now open in a way that no badge or scanner could control. The second staffer turned back to her slowly, his voice lower now, stripped of performance, stripped of assumption. "You shut down the entire conference," he said, not accusing, not questioning, just stating what he could no longer deny. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. "No," she replied calmly. "I revealed what it was willing to ignore." The distinction settled into the space with quiet precision. Around them, people began to shift, not away, but inward, drawn closer by the clarity of what had just unfolded. The man in the gray hoodie spoke under his breath, but loud enough to carry. All of this, because they would not check. The woman in navy answered, her voice steady. "No, because they already decided." The difference mattered. Naomi heard it. She acknowledged it with the slightest nod, not to them, but to the truth in the words. The second staffer looked down briefly, then back up, his posture no longer defensive, no longer rigid. Just still. "What happens now?" he asked. It was not his place to ask, but he asked anyway. Naomi considered the question for a moment, not because she needed time to decide, but because the answer deserved to be understood, not rushed. She lifted her phone once more, her movements controlled, deliberate, as they had been from the beginning. "Next phase," she said. The voice on the other end responded instantly. "Ready." Naomi's eyes moved once across the staff, the crowd, the halted space behind them, taking in everything that had led to this point. Then she spoke, her tone unchanged, but carrying something final beneath it. "Initiate review protocol. Pull all access logs. Flag every interaction at entry points. I want a full report on bias patterns before the end of the day." There was no hesitation in the response. "Confirmed." The second staffer's expression shifted again, not in fear, not in panic, but in understanding. This was not ending. It was just beginning. Naomi lowered her phone slowly, her gaze steady. "This was never about one moment," she said. "It is about every moment like it that never gets corrected." The words moved through the space, settling into something deeper than the silence that followed. Because this time, it would not reset. This time, it would be recorded. And this time, it would be answered. The air did not rush back in all at once. It returned slowly, like the room itself was learning how to breathe again after being held still for too long. Conversations did not resume. They shifted, softer, more careful, as if everyone understood they had just witnessed something that could not be undone or ignored. Naomi Carter stood where she had always been, but now there was space around her. Not forced, not cleared, given. The second staffer remained in front of her, but the distance between them had changed in a way no step could measure. He looked at her differently now, not searching, not judging, but seeing, truly seeing, for the first time since she arrived. "I did not know," he said quietly. It was not an excuse. It was not enough, but it was honest. Naomi held his gaze, her expression steady, her voice calm. "That was the problem," she replied. The words were not harsh, but they did not soften anything either. Behind him, the third staff member straightened, her posture no longer uncertain, but aligned with something clearer. "The logs are already compiling," she said, her voice firm. "Every interaction is being recorded and flagged." She glanced briefly at Naomi, not for permission, but for confirmation that she understood what mattered now. Naomi gave the slightest nod. Not approval, recognition. The first staffer shifted again, his eyes moving from the screens to Naomi and back, as if trying to understand how quickly everything had changed. "Is the event coming back?" he asked, his voice uncertain, almost hopeful. Naomi looked past him, toward the now quiet hall, the paused stage, the empty space where something had been running just minutes ago without question. "No," she said simply. The answer settled immediately. No delay, no condition, just no. A ripple moved through the people standing nearby, not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable. The finality of it reached further than the screens ever could. The man in the gray hoodie shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, but in recognition of what it meant. "That is real accountability," he said under his breath. The woman in navy exhaled softly, her voice steady. Most places would have just apologized and moved on. Naomi heard them, but she did not turn. This was not about being seen by them. It was about what had been seen already. The second staffer lowered his head slightly, the weight of the moment settling fully now. "What happens to us?" he asked. It was a different question than before. Not about the event. About consequence. Naomi did not answer right away. She let the silence hold, not as punishment, but as space for the truth to sit where it belonged. Then she spoke, her voice even, grounded. "That depends on what the review shows," she said. "Not just what happened today, but what has been happening before it." The third staff member nodded again, her fingers already moving with purpose across the keyboard, no hesitation left in her actions. The system was no longer something they controlled. It was something they were accountable to. Naomi lifted her phone one last time, her movements as precise as they had been from the beginning. "Prepare a statement," she said. "Public release. No spin. Just facts." The response came immediately. "Understood." Naomi lowered the phone, her gaze returning to the entrance, the same space that had once been closed to her. Now it stood open, quiet, unchanged physically, but completely transformed in meaning. She took a single step forward, not to prove anything, not to claim anything, but simply because she could. And no one moved to stop her. Not this time. Naomi's step forward did not echo loudly, but it carried further than anything that had happened. Before it, the space parted without instruction, without resistance, as if the room itself had recalibrated around her presence. Inside the main hall, the silence still held, but it was no longer uncertain. It was reflective. Attendees stood scattered between rows of empty chairs, speakers remained near the stage, and every screen still displayed the same message, unchanged, unapologetic. Event canceled by executive authority. Naomi walked forward with measured calm, her pace unhurried, her posture steady, her eyes taking in the space that had once been denied to her not by structure, but by assumption. The second staffer remained near the entrance, watching her go, not following, not stopping, just standing in the place where his authority had once felt absolute. Behind him, the third staff member continued working, her focus sharp, her actions no longer reactive but purposeful. "Logs are fully extracted," she said, her voice carrying across the entrance. "Pattern analysis is already identifying repeat flags across multiple entry points." The words moved through the room, picked up by those close enough to understand what they meant. This was not a single moment. It was a pattern, and now it was visible. Naomi reached the edge of the main floor and stopped, not because she needed to, but because this was where everything converged. The stage ahead, the screens above, the people around her, all of it connected by a system that had just been forced to reveal itself. A man near the front row spoke quietly, almost to himself. "She shut down millions of dollars in minutes." Another voice answered from behind him. "No, she exposed something worth more than that." Naomi did not turn. She did not acknowledge the commentary. She simply stood there, letting the weight of the moment exist without interruption. Then she lifted her phone again, her movements consistent, controlled, precise. "Status update," she said. The response came immediately. "Public statement drafted. Internal review initiated." Legal and ethics teams are on standby. Media inquiries are already coming in. Naomi listened without reacting, her gaze steady on the empty stage that had been prepared to celebrate innovation, progress, and access. Words that now felt different, heavier. Release the statement, she said, and include the access log summary. No edits. No delay. Confirmed, the voice replied. Naomi lowered her phone slowly, her eyes still on the stage, then finally turned, not toward the entrance, but toward the people standing around her. Not as an audience, not as spectators, as witnesses. This space was built to move ideas forward, she said, her voice even, carrying clearly without force. But today it showed something else. The room remained still, listening, fully. It showed how easily progress is blocked when the wrong person decides who belongs. The words did not accuse. They revealed. Naomi paused, letting the truth settle into every corner of the room, into every person who had watched it happen. Then she continued, softer now, but sharper. That is what ends today. The sentence landed with finality, not as a promise, but as a decision already in motion. Around her, people did not clap. They did not cheer. They stood, still, present, understanding, because this was not a moment for noise. It was a moment for clarity. And clarity, once seen, could not be unseen. The room did not move, but something within it had already changed. It was not the lights, not the screens, not the structure of the conference itself. It was the understanding that now lived inside every person standing there. Naomi Carter stood at the center of it, not elevated, not distant, just present in a way that could no longer be overlooked or dismissed. The stage behind her remained empty, but it no longer felt like a place waiting to begin. It felt like a place that had already revealed something far more important than any presentation ever could. Across the hall, small conversations began again, quieter than before, more deliberate, as if every word now carried awareness of what had just happened. Not gossip, not speculation, reflection. At the entrance, the second staffer had not moved from his position, but his posture had softened, no longer guarding, no longer deciding, just standing in the space where a decision had once been made too quickly. The third staff member continued her work, her screen filled with lines of data that now told a story no one could ignore. Patterns, repetition, proof. Naomi lowered her phone one final time, her hand resting at her side, no longer needed as a tool, only as a reminder of what had been done. She took a slow breath, not to steady herself, but to mark the moment. This was the part most people missed. Not the confrontation, not the command, but the quiet after, where everything settles into what it truly is. She turned slightly, her gaze moving across the room one last time, not searching, not measuring, just seeing. Fully. I did not need to raise my voice, she said, her tone calm, almost reflective. I just needed the truth to be seen. The words did not echo, but they stayed, resting in the space like something permanent. The man in the gray hoodie lowered his head slightly, not out of discomfort, but respect. The woman in navy nodded once, her expression steady, as if something unspoken had been confirmed. Naomi looked toward the entrance again, toward the same path she had been denied at the beginning, now open without question, without resistance, without anyone left to challenge it. But she did not walk faster. She did not claim the space with urgency. She simply moved forward at the same measured pace, the same quiet confidence that had been there from the start. As she passed the check-in gate, no scanner beeped, no voice interrupted, no hand reached out to stop her. The system did not need to recognize her anymore. The people did, and that was the difference. At the edge of the exit, she paused for just a fraction of a second, not to look back at the event, not to revisit what had happened, but to leave something behind without saying it directly. A standard, a boundary, a reminder. Then she stepped out into the daylight beyond the glass doors, the world outside unchanged, but the one behind her no longer the same. Inside, the screen still held the message. The log still compiled. The review still moved forward. And in the minds of everyone who had been there, one truth remained, clear and undeniable. You can deny a person access, but you cannot deny the truth. Once it decides to stand in the room,